Word games. Duh, of course. I mean, like, Scrabble, Mad Libs, all the hits. Hell, maybe I'll even bring Boggle.
Rebecca Bunch is a perfect character, in part because there's two things she does at once. Because she's crazy, she facilitates the entertaining part of this comedy show, doing everything over the top, and like none of us would actually do, even if we secretly want to. She has none of our shame, but all of our minute desires. And because she's crazy, she also facilitates a fascinating character study, of course. I think both elements are illustrated so well and so painfully in the 9th episode of Season 1, I'm Going to the Beach with Josh and His Friends, which could be classified as a bottle episode. It's directed by Kenny Ortega, who also directed Hocus Pocus, and it's written by Doug Mand and Dan Greger.
It's her pee hole that's been destroyed.
By this point, Rebecca has been in West Covina for a while now and hasn't really made a lot of friends. Things seem to look up when Valencia invites her to the crew's classic beach trip, something that's become a little bit too classic for Greg. He keeps trying to introduce new elements and is met with stubborn resistance. Paula sees in Valencia what we see during Women Gotta Stick Together. While Rebecca is high on excitement, Paula cautions her against falling for such an obvious trap before giving up entirely. Rebecca being so giddy she can't help but alert Daryl to such an extracurricular excursion. He gives her an idea for the trip, which is so ostentatious she is able to recognize that, or at least pass as a person who doesn't need to go big to impress a few people. Because she does, and so we learn something about our good friend Hector.
Yeah, I'm so stoked, and I promise this time I'm not gonna oversleep and miss it.
You probably will.
On the bus, Rebecca finds herself the odd woman out, her big plan having backfired pretty resoundingly, pushing her further and further. Part of the character study mentioned before is the tension between self-acceptance and getting help, and it's a gray zone for a lot of Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, as it is in life, but we do reach milestones along the way. This episode spotlights loneliness as part of Rebecca's struggle, and when Rebecca identifies Josh's crew as the group of friends she wants to infiltrate, the question arises, is it because of her loneliness, or is it because of Josh? And then there's the second question, I think, which is, does it matter? For Rebecca right now, they're kind of one and the same. This is about validation. Having friends and being with Josh are about feeling like she belongs, and that doesn't come from a physical space necessarily, nor is it altogether healthy.
I mean, ever since my divorce went through, it's just, I feel like something's missing.
I feel like something is missing might recur later in the series, so we have characters encroaching upon some kind of mysterious unhappiness in their lives, which Rebecca may or may not address, primarily by function of driving the plot. By stopping to pick up Daryl, she introduces him to White Josh and they seem to become friends. She also cites herself as the connector of Greg and Heather, and that's technically true. This is what Rebecca does. She brings people together by accident because she inserts herself into people's lives. In this episode about the logistics of friendship, we reflect on Rebecca's relationship to relationships themselves, how she perceives each one in her life very specifically and sometimes in archetypal terms. Paula is her spunky sidekick, Valencia her villain, Josh her Prince Charming, Greg the sarcastic bartender. In this, maybe she misses things, and in fact, Rebecca has the answers right in front of her but can't yet recognize them. I can't blame her for that, personally, because the easiest solution to a problem sounds fine when that problem is made so real. This is the moment when a chill ran down my spine, because never on television have I seen my own life replicated, and this time is not about racial representation, but something even deeper, the knowledge that other people so clearly shared my most personal experiences as a human being. As Rachel Bloom likes to shout at her live shows, you are not alone, and this episode was where I felt that for the first time. In the show, but also in media. It's in the direction, the performance, the scenario. It's almost physical, the sensation of being alone and yet surrounded by people. How do you explain that to somebody? And why would you? So Rebecca identifies White Josh as her bus buddy, which leads to some pretty foundational character details for him that pass Rebecca by as soon as they start. Again, I totally get this, and what we have here is the probably controversial relationship between irrational self-hatred and the limit of that irrationality. Rebecca's kind of a dick to White Josh, and he underscores that by playing it off gracefully. But, as the pretty lame guy in high school and the quiet guy in college, I was often grouped with the other guy who couldn't find a partner, and I just could not figure out how to talk to this person, like we were from two different planets and neither one was Earth. Something as simple and everyday as a conversation can be an existential challenge for some people. I probably don't have to tell you, but Misfit Island sucks. But it's interesting how loneliness breeds this kind of behavior in Rebecca and myself, and so always the depiction of cause and effect is central to the overall mission of the show. You don't have to like Rebecca, but maybe you can understand her. This also gives White Josh a chance to exit stage left for a while, in time for Daryl to arrive. Rebecca risks looking like a loser with a guy who doesn't seem to fit in, just so she fits in with somebody. And then White Josh comes back, and these two hit it off right away. This pushes Rebecca to a last resort, a pretty spectacular pole dance that is, again, maybe a little too spectacular. This is how Rebecca will always eventually try to express herself, not necessarily with pole dancing, but in a way that nobody understands. And she doesn't fully understand that they don't understand.
True pole is about reappropriating the male gaze.
If Paul is still keeping this list, showing Josh her cervix would certainly be the latest addition. And this forces Rebecca's hand. Valencia confronts her about the exhibition, and Rebecca finds herself trying to explain why she's here. This is Rebecca being put on trial for her very presence, which is what people with low self-esteem are always doing to themselves anyway. If they're gonna be around, poking people with their proximity, they better have a good reason. And what spills out will probably be intricate, because you've been thinking about this your whole life. Wikipedia defines imposter syndrome as a concept describing high-achieving individuals who are marked by an inability to internalize their accomplishments and a persistent fear of being exposed as a fraud. In other words, not feeling like you belong at a job, which I think is kind of the general example. The Wikipedia article cites a 1978 study which noted that this is something high-achieving women often feel. Some of us might look at something like that and think there's just something wrong with women, psychologically, hormonally, while some of us might look at that and consider the culture of male-dominated spaces and how, historically, such people have reacted to other kinds of people. However it comes down, nobody should feel like a fraud in their everyday lives, but the wrinkle here is that Rebecca, in this moment, on this bus, is kind of a fraud. When Aline Brosh McKenna or Rachel Bloom are prompted to give the show's premise, sometimes you get two answers in one, where the show is spotlighting the different ways the world makes love an urgent priority for women, who are then called crazy for behaving urgently, and then it's also an exploration of how, biologically, love does make our brains crazy, how someone who do what Rebecca did must have some underlying issues. And initially these might seem like contradictory terms, at once exposing the crazy ex-girlfriend as a fabrication, but also psychoanalyzing her. I guess it's like covering all bases. In this game of inclusion, the show creators are trying to address as many people as possible. Those who have been wronged by a label, those who do struggle with these issues, and everyone in between. But it also goes back to what I feel in my heart about satire, that posing a problem is fine, but providing a solution is even better, and seems to come from a more sensitive storytelling tendency in general. Doing both is a high-wire act that can be confusing, at least to me, where the answers that hit on narrative cue may turn out to be misdirection. You might have also noticed that Rebecca is not the biggest fan of White Josh, which we get more of in this episode.
Oh, I'm sorry, he's terrible. It's like he's allergic to shirts. Put on a shirt, because no one wants to see that. Wow, a shirt with sleeves. You meeting the president? Oh, God, it's just White Josh and his 8-pack. No sleeves, no service.
This might be a reach, but what if her animosity reflects on her feelings for Josh? That the erudite and nerdy Rebecca Bunch wouldn't really be into a guy like that. But she can't see that because, well, we know the story. To that, there's a bit of a happy ending in the episode, where Josh tells Rebecca once again that he's really glad she moved here, and he doesn't think she's crazy at all. That would theoretically be the ultimate validation, and the final number of the episode fills out that feeling. It is an earned happiness, and a moment of connection that others wouldn't understand, but it is also, utterly, built on a half-truth, a lie by the act of omission. Rebecca had told everybody she moved here because she's in love with West Covina, after running through her classic lie she's just command running at this point and is barely aware of. Daryl contradicts her testimony, and so she comes somewhat clean. Even still, everyone is pretty uncomfortable and shuffles off the bus, but Josh stays behind. The second reprise of West Covina is as true as it's always been. This is about Josh, and only Josh, and so Paula's prediction that his friends were just stepping stones proves accurate. This is an episode where things come together really nicely. The arc of Valencia has a nice peak, where we continue to explore her competition with other women, and this number is the perfect setup for her antagonism toward Rebecca. The differences between Greg and Josh finally come to a head, and they settle things for the moment. Heather and Daryl fit perfectly into the crew, which is now quite far from classic. And yet the final piece doesn't fall into place when it should. In love with West Covina.
I'm so happy that you're in town. And I don't think you're crazy at all.
This is really nice, but suggests that Josh might find her crazy were he to learn the truth that we understand. It's hard to have that Brechtian distance required to criticize in a moment of such emotional victory, so what we find is that it's not an end point, but part of a setup. Josh leaves, and Rebecca stumbles out of the party bus of pain into the waiting arms of Paula. This would be a typical bottle episode, save for Paula's absence, and that certainly is disappointing, but her role in the episode's story is so important. Rebecca spends the episode trying to get the approval of Valencia and Greg and Josh, but it's Paula's that ultimately matters. The second West Covina reprise helps Rebecca finally admit to Paula that she loves Josh. It's the Paula part of this equation that matters, more than the content of the admitting. On one side, Rebecca wants to make friends because she is lonely. On the other side, Paula wants Rebecca to admit she moved here for Josh, which Rebecca had been denying for the last 8 episodes and exhausted Paula by episode 2. Put these together, and their bond grows even stronger to the point where it's practically familial.
Don't ever lie to me again.
Okay, Mama.
It seems like mother and daughter are forever at odds on television, but for Rebecca and Paula, it's an aspirational relationship. We see then that friendship comes from truth. The message of the episode and the answer to Rebecca's loneliness is that there may be people who will accept your true self unconditionally, but you're going to have to be that true self. Rebecca learns a similar lesson in episode 2. The way to make friends isn't with a scheme, like braving yoga or renting a party bus, because there are lies at the foundation of each. You gotta be realsies, and I think that's something we should all keep in mind when next we find ourselves stranded on Misfit Island.
Yeah. My mouth tastes like pole.
How did that taste?
And my own pussy, because it was on pole.
And next up, Jane the Virgin.
Who doesn't need to go big to impress a few people, because she does, and so we learn something about our good friend Hector.
Yeah, I'm so stoked, and I promise this time I'm not gonna oversleep and miss it.
You probably will.
On the bus, Rebecca finds herself the odd woman out, her big plan having backfired pretty resoundingly, pushing her further and further. Part of the character study mentioned before, Paula sees in Valencia what we see during Women Gotta Stick Together. While Rebecca is high on excitement, Paula cautions her against falling for such an obvious trap before giving up entirely. Rebecca being so giddy she can't help but alert Daryl to such an extracurricular excursion. He gives her an idea for the trip, which is so ostentatious she is able to recognize that, or at least pass as a person.
Word games. Duh, of course. I mean, like, Scrabble, Mad Libs, all the hits. Hell, maybe I'll even bring Boggle.
Rebecca Bunch is a perfect character, in part because there's 2 things she does at once. Because she's crazy, she facilitates the entertaining part of this comedy show, doing everything over the top, and like none of us would actually. Ortega, who also directed Hocus Pocus, and it's written by Doug Mand and Dan Greger.
It's her pee hole that's been destroyed.
By this point, Rebecca has been in West Covina for a while now and hasn't really made a lot of friends. Things seem to look up when Valencia invites her to the crew's classic beach trip, something that's become a little bit too classic for Greg. He keeps trying to introduce new elements and is met with stubborn resistance, even if we secretly want to. She has none of our shame, but all of our minute desires. And because she's crazy, she also facilitates a fascinating character study, of course. I think both elements are illustrated so well and so painfully in the 9th episode of Season 1, I'm Going to the Beach with Josh and His Friends, which could be classified as a bottle episode. It's directed by Kenny